blogging is dead. Well, at least certain approaches to blogging are. Don't waste your time going down these roads, which are total dead ends. Instead, let me show you how to adapt your blogging so that you can continue to thrive as a content creator. The first approach to blogging that really is kind of dead, that we just need to adapt, is niche sites. We've talked about niche sites for years and years and years. In fact, a few years ago, we actually stopped calling them that here at Income School and mostly refer to all the websites we create as just income sites or just websites in general. And that's because the concept of the niche site, as it's kind of been defined and understood in our industry, has become less and less and less effective over time. If you're focusing on building a website that is maybe 30 to 50 blog posts on a very specific topic that you may or may not actually have any experience with, focusing on very long tail keywords, and where you hope to be able to remain totally and completely anonymous, yeah, that approach to blogging isn't really gonna work anymore. But that doesn't mean if that's where you started, that you need to completely start over. The reality is there are some aspects of the niche site that are still working today, and that makes sense that they'll continue to work for a long, long time. The main advantage that niche websites have is staying focused on a very specific topic. In fact, in the Google Helpful Content updates over the last couple of years, one of the things Google has said is that a website should have a specific topic. General websites do not have an advantage even if they have tons and tons and tons of content and a lot of authority in certain industries. They're not going to beat you in your niche unless that's also the focus of their website. Staying really focused actually gives you a bit of an edge, but not if you only focus on long tail keywords that you're confident you can win. Chances are you're going to need to create more content now than you maybe thought you were going to need to if you started this a couple of years ago, or if you started this based on videos you watched from 4 or 5 years ago. So let's talk about what we need to adapt. First of all, 30 to 50 blog posts still can bring in a lot of traffic, but it's probably not going to cut it anymore. And it's not just because we need massive amounts of content to be successful, but rather because we need depth of information, depth of content. You see, in order to be successful, even in a fairly specific niche, you need to cover a topic with a lot of depth, with enough information that somebody could leave your website and feel confident that one, they got that information from a source that knows what they're talking about, and two, that they got the information that they needed. When Google says that you kind of have shallow content, they're referring to two different things. The first one is each article itself. You see, an article should be written to respond to at least one specific search query. Oftentimes, we're going to end up ranking for multiple very closely related queries. And for that reason, it's a good idea to make sure that you have good depth of information in your article. Also, because a lot of people are going to come even with one main primary search query, but they're going to be looking for slightly different things. And so we want to make sure that we're responding to search queries that are not so simple that the few sentences at the top of the SERP are going to completely answer the question that they had. The second aspect of shallow content is having a website that only covers the superficial aspects of the topic. So if you have this niche site that's really focused on one thing, but you only cover those long tail keywords that you're confident you can rank for, you never really get into the deep, meaty content, the deep, meaty information. Really what we want to do is plan our content in clusters. So we start with our niche, and if you're building a niche site and we're only planning on like 30 to 50 articles, chances are you picked a fairly specific niche, I hope. If it was pretty broad and you don't want to write a lot of content, that could be a problem too. But then we want to break that niche down into much more specific subtopics. And for each one of those subtopics, we want to make sure that we cover that topic thoroughly. Every single blog post within that subtopic should respond to at least one specific search query, even though we may feel like we're not in a position to actually rank for that search query because it's really competitive, because it's only big websites. The problem is if you don't answer that search query and it's the most searched search query in your industry, then it looks like you didn't cover the topic very thoroughly and Google thinks that your content is shallow. So one, write posts on the really highly competitive topics that everybody else in your niche has to write about, but also make sure you write articles on those low competition topics and then link together all the articles in these clusters so that Google can quickly see that they all relate to each other and that you've covered that subtopic in depth, and build out a few of these clusters on your website. You do that and a fairly specific niche site can still do really well. The second thing you need to do is gain actual experience. It used to be that if you could just create content answering these questions that most other people are ignoring and haven't answered those questions before online, you're going to be able to get traffic. Well, now Google would rather point someone to another article that's maybe not as helpful from a content standpoint, but where the author seems a little bit more trustworthy or at least experienced with the topic. If you're reviewing a product and you've never touched it before, that's a problem. And so if somebody else is reviewing a similar product, or it is just even writing and including some information about that product, but it's clear that they have it, it's going to make a difference. You don't have to become a world-class expert in your niche to be successful online. But you do need to work on gaining some experience and letting that experience flow through the content so that the reader and the algorithm can tell that you know what you're talking about. The third way niche sites need to adapt is that you need to stop trying to be anonymous. If you want to have any influence over people, you want them to trust anything that you're saying, you have to sound like a person, not a robot. If you're going to stay completely anonymous, people kind of wonder, who's behind this? Where's the information coming from? And why should I trust this source that, who knows, maybe it's a foreign spy network and they're just trying to get me on their website so they can hack my computer or something. It's important that we at least give people enough that they can feel confident that our information is coming from a reputable source, or at least a source that knows what they're talking about. People don't connect to websites, people connect to people. And so if you can be a person on the other end of the website instead of just someone anonymous in the background, you're going to be more successful. This doesn't mean that you need to post your home address, your phone number, or other personal information on your website. You don't even have to show a bunch of pictures of you and your family. That's not necessary to be successful on Google. And realistically, if you have a reason to do it, you can use a pseudonym, or nom de plume, as the more sophisticated like to say. It's okay to do that, but base that pseudonym on reality. Make a character that is a representation of who you are so that you can just keep your name and maybe even your likeness anonymous, but still be a real human on the other end. You don't have to build a massive business website to be successful on Google, even if that's what the comment section is saying these days. Do you like that? If you did, let me know by giving me a big thumbs up. But actually, I can't see you, so if you could just click the little thumbs up down below. Yeah, that's better. Thanks. We've got more though, so let's get back into it. The second type of blogging that totally needs to adapt or change dramatically is mass-produced content websites. This is kind of like the other end of a spectrum. So really, like, no matter where you lie on the spectrum, maybe some of these principles will still apply to you. Just a thought. The solution to AI and these changes with the Google algorithm is not just more content. In fact, more content that's not the right content is more likely to harm your website than help it. In fact, with these Google Helpful Content updates, Google has specifically said, if you have unhelpful content on your website, it will impact the ranking of even the helpful content on your website. In fact, with the latest Google Helpful Content update, Google has specifically said that now they're actually placing a qualifier, not a manual penalty, but within the algorithm. If it detects unhelpful content on your website, according to their definition, it's going to put a qualifier across your whole website that now is going to drop you in the rankings, site-wide. And it's a qualifier that gets worse with more unhelpful content. So make sure that the content that you have published on your website is actually helpful. Mass producing content, it's kind of tricky to make sure it's all helpful. So first, let's talk about what aspect of this approach is still working. More content is better as long as it's the right content. So it's not that we necessarily need to back way off and have a lot less content on our websites. Your content just needs to follow a good content strategy. And like I said about niche sites, your website needs to have a clear topic or a clear purpose. If you have a really general topic website, that could be hurting you these days with Google. The topic can be big, it can be reasonably broad. It just needs to fit together cohesively. But this approach needs to adapt. So what's the first thing to adapt? Well, we need a cohesive content strategy. We need to create clusters of content that cover specific topics pretty thoroughly. This is sounding a little bit familiar. If you watch the first half of the video, it should. Create specific categories of content, and within those create specific subcategories of content, and within those create clusters of articles that are on topics that are very, very closely related to each other, that all link together, and that cover that little piece of the topic exhaustively. That means covering those really competitive search queries as well as the less competitive kind of long tail ones that you're confident you can rank for even from the very beginning. We need to do it all, or if not all, at least enough to cover the topic in depth. I mean, imagine if you had a website about parenting, but you're like, you know what? I find that disciplining children, that topic, is just, it's very, very saturated. So I'm not going to cover that on my parenting website. When a person looks at that, or when Google looks at that and they say, wow, you don't cover disciplining children as part of parenting. It's not a very thorough website, is it? And that's just what it looks like. You know that you didn't cover it because it's competitive and that you're focusing on more long tail search queries, but they don't know that, and it makes it look like maybe you don't know what you're talking about. For your website topic and for the specific topics you choose to cover, there's going to be other content that those people are going to need. If you don't include it on your website, they're going to need to find it elsewhere. Include it on your website, and that's going to make it really clear to people and to the algorithm that you do know what you're talking about, that you have experience and some expertise in this topic. The next thing that needs to adapt is we need to include real experience. This is hard to do on a mass-produced website. Man, this also sounds kind of familiar. On a niche website, this is probably pretty easy because you only have a handful of articles. When you have potentially 1,000+ blog posts on your website, adding personal anecdotes to all of them may seem overwhelming at best. You're probably not going to be able to personally edit every single article that comes through and add personal anecdotes and stories and photos to every single one of your blog posts. So what do? One option is to utilize writers that have actual experience on the topic so they can include their own personal stories and anecdotes and maybe even include some of their own photos. This works really well when those writers are writing under their own name and building their own reputation within the industry. Honestly, it looks more realistic that way anyway, because any website that has thousands of blog posts all written by one person, that's fairly questionable. Another option is to utilize writers who can do a good job of behaving more like a reporter, where basically they're going to go out and do real research, they're going to talk to real people with real experience, and they're going to write it that way. And that way they can include that experience, that expertise from other people, put that into the blog posts, and publish them on the website. By the way, these same principles hold true if you or your writers are using AI to help with the content creation process. If you just use AI to generate a bunch of content, it's not going to be any better than those writers who, once again, go scrape a bunch of information off the internet, regurgitate it in a new way, and try to publish it. We're seeing that become less and less and less and less and less effective every single day that passes. For those of you who have been around a while, or if you want to go look it up, the approach we took to camperreport.com when we first hired writers, that's the one that seemed to work the best for me, and that honestly, I think will work the best going forward. It's what I'm looking to do now on my Project Double Time website. So I will keep you updated on how that goes and give you more details about that process in more content later, because this video is already getting kind of long. Wherever your approach to blogging falls, whether you're trying to do a very small, very focused website, or a really big, really broad website, something very authoritative and massive, or you're a business trying to create content for your website, the approach to blogging needs to adapt, and the adaptations, as you could probably see from this video, are very, very similar. Small end, big end adaptations, basically the same, but just a little bit nuanced. So go out there and adapt, and I'll see you in our next video.
Have faith. Have faith. Believe in your source. Have faith.